The text message glowed on David Morrison's phone at 2:47 a.m. "I'm only marrying you for your money, and we both know it." It was from his fiancée, Amanda, or rather his ex-fiancée, as of 3 minutes ago, after he'd caught her in his home office phonographing his financial documents to send to her lawyer, before they'd even made it to the altar. David sat in his penthouse, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, and realized he'd never felt more alone in his life. At 34, he'd built a tech company from his college dorm room into a $200 million empire. He had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: someone who wanted him for who he was, not what he was worth. That's when the idea hit him, an idea so radical, so potentially transformative, that it would lead him on a 6-month journey through the hidden layers of human character, ultimately revealing a truth about love and authenticity that would shake him to his core. What if he became someone else entirely? Not just downplaying his wealth, but living a completely different life. What would he discover about the women he dated? And more importantly, about himself? 2 weeks later, David stood in a cramped studio apartment in Logan Square, a neighborhood he'd only driven through on his way to somewhere else. The place was 450 square feet of peeling paint and a radiator that clanked like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. It cost $850 a month. He'd rented it under his middle name, Michael Harris. His new life had been meticulously constructed: a job as a night shift manager at a 24-hour grocery store, a beat-up 2007 Toyota Corolla with a mysterious rattle somewhere in the engine, a wardrobe from Target and thrift stores, a flip phone because smartphones are too expensive. Every detail was designed to paint a picture of a man living paycheck to paycheck, struggling but honest. His business partner, James, thought he'd lost his mind. "You're going to work actual shifts at a grocery store?" James asked incredulously. "You're a millionaire playing poverty dress-up. What's the point?" But David was firm. This wasn't poverty tourism. He was going to live this life authentically. 8 hours a night, 5 days a week, dealing with difficult customers and mopping spills in aisle 7. He needed to understand what this life actually felt like, not just play act it for a few dinner dates. "I need to know," David said quietly. "I need to know if anyone can love the man without the money." His first date as Michael was with Elena Rodriguez, a 29-year-old nurse he'd met at a community book club he'd joined. She'd suggested they meet at a food truck park. "More bang for your buck," she said with a wink. Michael, David, arrived on a bicycle, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing scrubs because she'd come straight from a 12-hour shift. "Sorry about the professional attire," she laughed, gesturing at her clothes. "I didn't have time to change, and honestly, after the day I've had, I'm lucky I remembered to brush my teeth." Michael, David, liked her immediately. They got tacos from a truck called Holy Moly and sat at a picnic table covered in carved initials in old stains. The food was incredible, and the entire meal cost them $18. "So, night shift manager," Elena said, biting into her al pastor taco. "That's got to be rough on your sleep schedule." "It has its moments," David admitted. This, at least, was true. He'd been genuinely working those shifts, and the exhaustion was real. "But the pay is decent, and it's honest work. What about you? How do you handle 12-hour shifts?" "Coffee, so much coffee," she laughed, "and the knowledge that I'm actually helping people." That sounds cheesy, but it's true. When you see someone come in scared and hurting, and you're part of the team that makes them better, that's worth all the terrible hours and the hospital coffee that tastes like regret. They talked until the food truck started closing down. She told him about her family, her parents who'd immigrated from Mexico when she was 5, her younger brother in community college, her dream of becoming a nurse practitioner someday. He told her carefully constructed truths about his life, the challenges of managing difficult employees, the weird things people bought at 3 a.m., his love of reading and old movies. When they said goodbye, Elena touched his arm gently. "This was really nice, Michael. Most guys I meet just want to talk about themselves. You actually listened." David drove home to his studio apartment. He'd committed to sleeping there on his nights he was being Michael, and lay on the lumpy mattress staring at the water-stained ceiling. Something felt different about this. Real. Over the next 3 weeks, he went on 7 more dates. There was Jessica, a barista with dreams of opening her own coffee shop, who split every check down to the penny and talked enthusiastically about her savings plan. There was Priya, a graphic designer doing freelance work, who showed up with a Groupon for a pottery class and made him laugh until his sides hurt. There was Amanda, different Amanda, a veterinarian technician who cried when she talked about the animals she couldn't save. But it was his 3rd date with Elena that changed something fundamental. They were walking through Millennium Park after he'd gotten off his shift at 7 a.m. The morning sun was just starting to warm the spring air, and the city was in that perfect quiet moment before rush hour chaos. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" Elena asked, stopping to look at the bean sculpture. "Always." "I Googled you." She turned to face him, her expression somewhere between sheepish and serious. "Michael Harris Grocery Store, Chicago." And nothing came up. No Facebook, no Instagram, no LinkedIn. You're like a ghost. David's heart hammered. He'd prepared for this, but the lie still tasted bitter. "I'm not really a social media person. Too much drama, you know? I like keeping my life simple and private." Elena studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered if she could see through him. Then she smiled. "Good. That's actually really refreshing. Everyone's so busy performing their lives online, they forget to actually live them." She linked her arm through his, and they kept walking. But David noticed something. She was being careful, protecting herself. In her position, he'd do the same. That night, back in his penthouse, he still went there on his nights off. David sat with a glass of whiskey and thought about what he was doing. He'd started this experiment to find someone who could love him without his wealth, but he was building that relationship on a foundation of lies. What did that make him? His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Thanks for this morning. You make me feel like maybe good guys actually exist. Sweet dreams, even though it's 10 p.m. and your sleep schedule is completely backwards." David stared at that message for a long time. He typed back, "You make me want to be a good guy. Sleep well." Then he opened his laptop and did something he hadn't planned. He actually looked at his grocery store paycheck. $1,847 for 2 weeks of work after taxes. He thought about Elena's apartment. She'd shown him pictures. A 1-bedroom she shared with a roommate because Chicago rents were crushing. He thought about Jessica's detailed spreadsheet for her coffee shop dream, every dollar accounted for and saved. He thought about Priya's excitement over a Groupon. These were real lives with real constraints, making real choices every single day. And he was playing dress-up in their world. His phone rang. "James." "Please tell me you're done with this insanity," James said without preamble. "We need you back. The Henderson deal is falling apart and—" "I am learning something," David said, looking out at the glittering city. "I'm just not sure what yet." He hung up and looked at Elena's text message again. By month 2, David was seeing Elena regularly, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. She'd come over to his studio after her shifts, and they'd watch old movies on his laptop. He'd meet her after his work, and they'd get breakfast at a diner that served eggs for $4.99. They'd walk through neighborhoods, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her student loans, $87,000 from nursing school, a number that made her voice tight with stress. He told her about his fictional student loans, feeling like the worst kind of fraud. She told him about her father's heart attack last year and how she'd picked up extra shifts to help with medical bills. He held her while she cried and wanted desperately to tell her he could write a check and make all of it go away. But he didn't, because that would end this, whatever this was. One night, Elena cooked dinner in his tiny studio kitchen, pasta with vegetables because it was cheap and filling. They ate sitting on his floor because his table only had one chair. "I need to tell you something," she said, twirling pasta on her fork. "And it's gonna sound crazy." David's stomach dropped. "Okay. I'm falling in love with you." She said it simply, directly, meeting his eyes. "And that terrifies me, because I've been hurt before, and I swore I'd be more careful this time. But Michael, you're different. You're kind, and you listen, and you don't try to fix everything. You just sit with me in the hard stuff. And her voice cracked slightly, "I wanted you to know, even if it's too soon to say it, even if it scares you off." David felt something break open in his chest. This woman, this extraordinary woman, was offering him her heart, offering it to a lie. "Elena," he started, and he almost told her everything right then, almost confessed the whole elaborate deception. But she kept talking. "I know you don't make much money. I know you're working night shifts at a grocery store, and I know you're struggling, and I want you to know that doesn't matter to me, at all. I've dated guys with money before, and they were," she searched for the word, "empty. Like they'd bought so many things they forgot to become people. You're real, Michael. You're solid and honest and real." The irony was like a knife between his ribs. "I'm falling for you too," he managed, and that, at least, was completely true. She smiled, radiant, and leaned over to kiss him, and David kissed him back while hating himself just a little bit more. Month 3 brought complications. Elena's roommate was moving out, and she couldn't afford the apartment on her own. She'd have to move back with her parents, 45 minutes outside the city. The commute would be crushing with her shift work, but she didn't have a choice. David watched her pack boxes in the apartment she loved, her movements tight with suppressed emotion, and he had to physically stop himself from saying, "Don't worry about it. I'll cover the rent. I'll buy you the building if you want." Instead, he helped her pack and told her they'd make the distance work. His business was suffering. James called almost daily with increasingly urgent problems. David would handle them remotely, late at night, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He was tired all the time from his grocery store shifts, and for the first time in his life, he genuinely didn't care about market share or quarterly projections. "You're checking out," James finally confronted him in person, showing up at the studio apartment uninvited. "We're letting everything we built fall apart for what? Some experiment? Some woman who doesn't even know who you really are?" "Maybe this is who I really am," David shot back. "Maybe you ever think of that? Maybe the guy in the penthouse, making deals and crushing competitors, maybe he's the costume. Maybe Michael Harris is more real than David Morrison ever was." James stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You sound insane. You know that, right?" Maybe he was insane, but he'd never felt more clarity. Month 4 was when everything started unraveling. David, as Michael, was working his grocery store shift when he saw her, Amanda, his ex-fiancée, the woman who'd texted him about marrying him for money. She didn't notice him at first, too busy talking loudly on her phone about a spa weekend in Scottsdale. David ducked behind a display of cereal, his heart pounding. "Excuse me," she called out, snapping her fingers at him. "You, employee, where's the organic section?" She still didn't recognize him. He was wearing a name tag that said Mike,
and a vest that made him invisible to people like her, people like he used to be. "Aisle 12, he said, keeping his voice flat, his head down. "Well, point me there. I don't have all day." He walked her to the aisle, watching her swipe through her phone, probably on dating apps looking for her next target. When she dismissed him with a wave, not even a thank you, he felt something crystallize inside him. This was what he'd been running from. This world of careless cruelty, where people were valuable only for what they could provide. But he was doing the same thing, wasn't he? Using Elena's genuine feelings for his own experiment? That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in his studio apartment, listening to the radiator clank, and knew he'd reached a crossroads. He could continue this charade, let Elena fall deeper into a love with a fiction, and then what? Eventually reveal himself? Hope she'd understand? The longer it went on, the worse the betrayal would be. Or he could end it now, disappear as Michael Harris, break her heart with ghosting rather than with the truth. Both options felt like poison. The decision was made for him in the worst possible way. Month 5. David was meeting Elena for dinner at their usual diner when his phone exploded with notifications, all of them from James, each more frantic than the last. "Call me now! Emergency! David, answer your phone!" He excused himself to the bathroom and called. "We're being sued," James said without preamble. "Henderson deal went south, and they're claiming breach of contract. It's a $40 million lawsuit, and they're going to the press by morning. Your name, your face, it's going to be everywhere by morning." David's blood glowed cold. "Can we settle?" "Not without you here, not without you at the table. David, you need to be David Morrison right now, or we lose everything." He stood in the diner bathroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt his two lives colliding. "I'll be there in an hour," he said quietly. When he returned to the table, Elena took one look at his face and reached for his hand. "What's wrong?" "I have to go. Work emergency." "At the grocery store?" The lie stuck in his throat. "Yes, they need me to cover a shift. I'm sorry." She squeezed his hand. "It's okay. Go. We can do this another time." He kissed her forehead, and it felt like goodbye. The lawsuit took 6 weeks to resolve. 6 weeks of David being fully David Morrison. Press conferences, legal meetings, boardrooms, and power suits. His face was in the Chicago Tribune, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. The case was settled for $15 million, a hit, but not a catastrophic one. During those 6 weeks, he barely saw Elena. Michael had to work double shifts, so he told her. He was too exhausted for visits. He was dealing with a family emergency. The lies piled up, each one easier than the last, each one making him hate himself a little more. Elena was understanding, patient, supportive. She sent him encouraging texts. She left care packages at his apartment, homemade meals, little notes that said, "Thinking of you." Every single one was an indictment. When the lawsuit finally settled, David sat in his penthouse apartment, his real home, and faced the truth. He couldn't go back to being Michael Harris. That life had been a fantasy, an escape, but it wasn't sustainable. And more importantly, it wasn't fair to Elena. He had to end it. He met her at their diner, and she lit up when she saw him, practically bouncing in her seat. "I have news," she said before he could even sit down. "I got the nurse practitioner position I applied for. It's a huge raise, almost $20,000 more a year. Michael, I can keep my apartment. Well, a different one, but in the city. And I was thinking," and she reached across the table for his hand, "maybe we could look at places together. I know we've only been dating for 5 months, but this feels right. You feel right." David felt the world tilt. She was offering him everything he'd wanted, a future with someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. Except she didn't know who he was. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Her face faltered at his tone. "Okay." I'm not who you think I am." And then he told her everything. He watched her face as he explained. The real David Morrison, the tech company, the $200 million net worth, the penthouse, the experiment. Every word felt like a betrayal being spoken out loud. Her expression moved through confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally something that looked like devastation. When he finished, silence hung between them like smoke.
"So this was all what? Research?" Her voice was quiet, dangerous. "I was your little poverty tourism project?" "No, Elena, I swear. You lied to me about everything. Your name, your job, your life. You let me worry about money in front of you. You let me feel guilty about not being able to afford nice dates. You let me share my struggles and my fears about student loans while you're worth $200 million? Her voice cracked. "I told you I loved you. I offered you a future. And none of it was real?" "My feelings were real," David said desperately. "Everything I felt for you was real. That's why I'm telling you now, because I do love you, and I can't keep lying." "You love me?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Love is honesty. Love is trust. Love is seeing someone for who they really are and choosing them anyway. But you never gave me that choice. You decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth. Can you honestly tell me nothing would have changed if you'd known? That you would have loved me exactly the same way?" Elena stood up, slinging her purse over her shoulder. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steel. "I guess we'll never know, will we? Because you took that possibility away from both of us." She walked out of the diner, and David didn't follow. The next month was the darkest of David's life. He stopped going to the grocery store. They didn't need Michael Harris anyway. He threw himself back into work, but it felt hollow. James was relieved to have him back, but even he could see something fundamental had changed. "You're here, but you're not here," James observed one day. "What happened with that nurse?" "I destroyed it," he said simply, "like I destroy everything real." He thought about texting Elena every day, wrote 100 messages he never sent. What could he say that would matter? Sorry felt pathetically inadequate. 3 weeks after their confrontation, his doorman called up. "Mr. Morrison, there is a young woman here to see you, Elena Rodriguez?" David's heart stopped. "Send her up." She looked tired when she stepped off the elevator, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't been sleeping, but she also looked resolved. "Nice place," she said, looking around the penthouse with an expression he couldn't read. "Elena, she interrupted. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because I've spent 3 weeks trying to process what you did, and I need you to understand something. Okay? You weren't wrong about people treating you differently for your money. You weren't wrong that it's hard to know who's real. But David," she used his real name deliberately, "by lying to me, you became exactly like the people you were running from. You treated me as a means to an end, an experiment, a way to prove something to yourself." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. "You wanted to know if someone could love you without your money, but here's where you actually proved that you don't trust anyone enough to give them the chance. And that's not about them, that's about you." "I know," David said quietly. "You're right, about all of it." Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I did love you, you know. The guy in the studio apartment who worked night shifts and watched old movies with me. I loved him. But he wasn't real, and I don't know if the real you is someone I could love because you never let me meet him." "Is there any chance?" David started, but she shook her head. "No, there isn't. Not because of the money or the lies, though those are enough, but because you fundamentally don't understand what you were looking for. You wanted someone to love you despite your wealth, but what you actually need is someone who loves you, wealth included. Someone who sees all of you, the success, the struggles, the insecurities that made you create Michael Harris in the first place, and stays anyway." She moved toward the elevator. "I hope you find that person someday. I really do. But it won't be me."
"David," he called as the elevator doors opened. "For what it's worth, knowing you changed me. You made me want to be better." She gave him a sad smile. "Then actually be better, David. Don't just want it." The elevator doors closed, and she was gone. David didn't date for 6 months after that. He sold his company to a larger tech conglomerate for $340 million, making him even wealthier and even more miserable. He tried therapy, he tried volunteering, he tried everything except the one thing he actually needed: honesty. Then one day he was at a bookstore, one of the few places he found peace, when he literally ran into someone, sending her books cascading across the floor. "I'm so sorry," he said, crouching to help gather them. "It's okay. I wasn't watching where I was—" The woman stopped mid-sentence. "David Morrison?" He looked up and froze. It was Priya, the graphic designer he'd gone on 2 dates with as Michael Harris. "Oh, God," he said. "Priya, listen, I need to explain. You're the tech guy who sold his company last month," she said, not letting him finish. "I saw the article in Cranes. And you're also Mike, the grocery store manager I went on those dates with." "I can explain," he started again, but she was laughing. "Oh, I know exactly what you were doing. I'm not an idiot." At his confused expression, she continued, "I knew you were lying from the second date. Your hands were too soft for someone who worked in retail. You knew nothing about actually managing a store, and you had this way of talking about money like you'd never had to worry about it." David felt his face flush. "Then why did you go out with me?" "Because I thought you'd eventually tell me the truth, and I was curious what kind of person creates an elaborate lie instead of just being honest." She tilted her head. "So what's the story? Inheritance you were hiding? Trust fund baby trying to find real love?" And maybe it was because he'd already lost everything that mattered, or maybe it was because Priya's directness was refreshing, but David told her the truth, the whole truth, right there in the bookstore aisle, including what happened with Elena. When he finished, Priya was quiet for a long moment. "That's heartbreaking," she said, "and kind of stupid, but also kind of understandable." "Which part?" "All of it." She considered him carefully. "You know what your problem was? You were testing people without giving them the same chance to test you. You wanted authenticity while being completely inauthentic yourself. That's not an experiment. That's a trap." "Yeah," David said quietly. "I figured that out. Too late, but I figured it out." "So what are you doing differently now?" "I don't know. Not dating, mostly. Trying to figure out who I actually am without the costumes." Priya nodded slowly. "Well, when you figure that out, maybe give me a call. The actual you, not Michael or whoever else you're pretending to be. I'm curious who that person is." She handed him her business card, real one this time, with her freelance design company logo on it, and walked away, leaving David standing in the bookstore holding her card and half a dozen books about authenticity. What David discovered didn't change everything. It changed him. 6 months later, David stood at a different coffee shop in a different neighborhood, waiting for Priya. This time, he'd been completely honest from the beginning. They'd been texting for weeks, real conversations about real things. She knew exactly who he was: wealth, insecurities, past mistakes, and all. When she walked in, she smiled and waved, and David felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope without pretense. "So," Priya said, settling into the chair across from him, "tell me about your day, the real one." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, David did. He told her about the board meeting where he disagreed with everyone and stuck to his position. He told her about the donation he'd made to a nursing scholarship fund, anonymously, but he told her anyway. He told her about having lunch at that same diner where he'd met Elena as Michael, and how he'd left a $500 tip for the waitress who'd served them so many times. That's either generous or guilty, Priya observed. Can it be both? Probably should be both. They talked for hours, and when the coffee shop closed, they walked through the city, him as himself, her as herself, no pretense on either side. So, here's my question. What did you actually learn from your little experiment? David thought about Elena's words, someone who loves you, wealth included. I learned that I was asking the wrong question. I wanted to know if someone could love me without my money. But the real question was whether I could be vulnerable enough to let someone love me completely, money, flaws, mistakes, and all. I was so scared of being used that I made it impossible to be known. And now? Now I'm trying to be knowable. It's terrifying, honestly. Good. Terrifying means you're doing it right. She kissed his cheek. Same time next week? Yeah, same time next week. As he walked home, to his penthouse, his real home, no more pretending, David thought about Michael Harris. That character had taught him something important. Simplicity had value. Struggle built character. And genuine connection was more precious than any amount of wealth. But Michael Harris had also been a lie. And lies, no matter how well-intentioned, always extract their cost. The real work wasn't pretending to be poor. It was having the courage to be rich, in money, yes, but also in honesty, vulnerability, and the kind of authentic connection that only comes when you stop testing people and start trusting them. He'd lost Elena. That was a grief he'd carry for a long time. But he'd learned something invaluable. You can't find real love while wearing a disguise. The person who truly sees you, who loves you for exactly who you are, they can only find you if you're brave enough to be found. David Morrison was finally ready to be found, and that changed everything.